Hi, I'll try to, thanks so much for attending this panel. I'll try to make my remarks as brief as possible so we can continue to move this panel along and everybody can get to lunch, understanding we're running quite a bit late. So my name is Amit Ricky. I'm President and CEO of Ccr Usa. We are a company that focuses on P3s. We're investors, developers, and operators of transportation infrastructure. That's all we focus on. Our portfolio includes roads, toll roads, urban mobility systems, which are light rail and subways, and airports. I'll focus my comments today on airports, really focusing on sort of how P3s can save our nation's airports, save taxpayer money, and improve passenger experience. I think we've all seen this. This is, these pictures are representative of a number of airports, actually I should say the vast majority of airports in our country. When we look at sort of these pictures, when we look at traveling through our airports, we see typically congested facilities that are in disrepair, essentially, requiring a significant amount of upgrading and a significant need of passenger experience improvement. So, just to sort of lay the groundwork and some framework, infrastructure broadly, and we've heard this theme over and over again at a number of conferences, including this conference. Essentially, there are two key issues, that really require greater public-private partnerships in the U.S. to fund our infrastructure gap. Essentially, there's been underinvestment in U.S. infrastructure since the 1960s. So back in the 1960s, we were spending about 3% of our GDP on infrastructure. And today, we're spending roughly a little over 2%. So there's a significant gap in infrastructure expenditure. And that funding gap is now over $1 trillion. So about $1.4 trillion of funding gap through 2025, which is not that far away, exists on infrastructure. However, we know that infrastructure leads to significant job creation. So altogether, if we were to close that funding gap, that would create 15.5 million direct jobs, which equals 12% of national employment. So it's pretty significant impact of infrastructure. And not only that, but these are higher paying jobs, which then have significant indirect impact to the economy and our economic well-being. And airports do make compelling infrastructure and are quite compelling from the perspective of public-private partnerships. This is some work that was done by BCG. Essentially shows that airports provide high job creation, high job sustainability, and are one of the infrastructure classes that is quite attractive in terms of bringing in private investment and public-private partnerships. So what can private sector do in the airport sector? I mean, what really happens? And this is evidence that we've compiled from statistics, our own experience, and other publicly available data. And what it really shows, it's that airports under private management that have private investment, typically increase their commercial revenues, their non-aeronautical revenue. They have lower operating costs due to efficiencies. Facilities are designed to operate more efficiently. Costs are optimized. Life cycle asset management is used so facilities are maintained over a long term. Construction costs typically are lower for new CapEx, new additions, and customer satisfaction improves. Just by way of example, yesterday I traveled through Houston Airport. I visited and had a tour of the new pier that United had opened up. So there's a 15-gate pier that United just opened. That pier was built in 2 years at a cost of $170 million. The Houston Airport System, which is a publicly owned entity, is building a similar pier across the ramp. Again, a 15-gate pier that is going to take between 5 and 7 years to construct and is going to cost 4 times as much. just sort of gives you the order of magnitude of efficiencies. Same things happening on either side of the airport, right? So now that we've talked about sort of the framework, let's just talk about sort of, what, not every airport, not every asset would be conducive or suitable for private investment. Our nation has over 19,000 airports, but of that, only about 5,000 are public use airports, and of those public use airports, about 600 have commercial service, and only about 300 have, a single airline or are served that goes to a single destination. So really, airports that have over 1 million passengers in our country are only about 119 airports, and which carry the vast majority of traffic. However, what we've also seen is that infrastructure investment or private sector investment in airports in the U.S. has been lagging the rest of the world. Obviously, for illustrative purposes only, this chart shows that Europe is probably the most advanced in terms of the amount of private sector investment in their airports, followed closely by Latin America, Asia Pacific region, primarily in Australia, but now increasingly in Japan, as the Japanese government is now planning to privatize 27 of its largest airports. But we're not seeing much in the U.S. market. So let's talk about embarking on our Airport B3 journey. So what's the need for airports? According to the Airport Council International, a report that was just recently released, U.S. airports need about $100 billion of investment over the next 5 years. That's a significant amount of investment. And what's really driving that investment? It's essentially aging facilities. Underpinning that is aging, commercially inadequate facilities that's driving that investment. But there are a number of factors that are also changing and are sort of moving us towards improving our airport infrastructure. There's been significant amount of airline consolidation in the industry, as we all know. And that has led to a change in passenger mix and the types of facilities that passengers require. There's essentially been a reduction on a real basis in federal grants for airports, and passenger facility charges have not increased since they were really implemented. So they've stayed flat at $4.50 per passenger. There's been discussion in Congress about removing tax exemptions for municipal bond financings that a lot of municipalities rely on to fund their airport infrastructure, coupled with strained balance sheets at the municipal level, at the airport level. So essentially, a lot of airports are struggling with the amount of debt that they have on their balance sheets as they continue to fund infrastructure, and adding more debt essentially will result in that debt becoming more expensive, and credit ratings deteriorating. There's increasing competition among airports. And I'm sure John will say, Seattle CTAC, the Seattle Tacoma International Airport, competes with Vancouver to the north and competes with Portland and San Francisco to the south. So airports need to sort of start thinking in terms of how they're going to be competitive, how they're going to be able to attract air traffic, how they're going to be able to attract passengers. Airlines are seeking faster solutions. So the example that I used in Houston, United Airlines essentially needed to have a facility. They financed it, they developed it, and they operate it currently. Southwest Airlines has done similar things as well, where they've, with respect with what they did at Dulles Love Field, what they've done at Houston Hobby, and a number of other facilities that they're working on, for example, Terminal 1 at LAX. So all of that, coupled with sort of historical impediments that we've had towards airport privatization, everything from conceptions about loss of control, about misconceptions around P3s, lengthy procurement processes, all of those are sort of now leading towards lessening some of these impediments, and and sort of getting to a point where time is right for greater private sector participation in the development and the financing of our airports. So let's just talk a little bit about some of these misconceptions and some of the experience to date. So, one of the biggest things that we hear about public-private partnerships and involving greater private sector participation in airports has been around loss of control. Municipalities, airport authorities feel that they will lose control of the asset if they allow for P3s or some level of privatization. What we need to understand is that the public authority always retains control. There's always oversight. There are very strict operating standards that the private sector operates under, and the public authority has the ability to step in at any point. Not only that, but the public authority typically sits on operating committees and operating boards to ensure that those operating standards are adhered to. So there's a significant amount of oversight and the ability for the asset, for the public authority to come back into the asset if the private sector is not performing according to the agreed operating standards. Not only that, but most of these are concessions or long-term leases. So the control passes back, or the asset really doesn't transfer over to the private sector. The private sector is simply providing services, operating the asset, developing the asset. The public sector always remains the owner of the asset. There's also been sort of this stigma around the private sector has a short-term focus and is out to make a profit. What we need to understand is that investing in infrastructure is all about the long term, so when the private sector does invest, if you choose your partners correctly, those partners will be motivated to think and invest over the long term. So built into the contractual structures need to be not only sort of the initial upgrades to the facility, but the continued maintenance of those facilities and continued investment in those facilities over the long term as demand changes. There are concerns around labor. Our experience shows us that, when there has been transfer, staff have been retained. In fact, what happens is it's the same staff that currently operate, under the public authority structure, are essentially freed up and incentivized to operate under a private enterprise structure. And so all of the regulatory constraints that they've been operating under, all of the bureaucracy that they've been operating under, they're freed from that so they can really sort of focus on running the business like a business. And that's, that's been sort of our experience globally in terms of, how existing staff are essentially empowered to then outperform and do better than what they've been doing previously. We've talked a bit about competition. Competition is key to continue to grow the airport, to continue to improve to continued improvement of facilities, continued improvement of passenger experience, so that there's continued traffic growth and marketing to bring in new services to the airport. There's also been sort of these myths around higher costs. Again, our experience shows us, the graph that I showed up previously, is that costs actually are lower. Costs for retailing, costs for concessions are actually lower, and those are those are passed on to the passengers, to the users of the facility, and so it's beneficial. It results in a net benefit. And finally, from an environmental standpoint, one of the key things obviously is, will environmental standards be met? And again, from the private sector side, we have to adhere to the same environmental principles and the environmental concerns and the environmental approvals that the public authority has to adhere to. That's a key focus. So we understand clearly that, if there's a deterioration of any sort of environmental standards or environmental regulations, that is not would have a significant impact on the investment facility, and that would be not in our best interest. So the U.S. has tried models for privatization, and there are some airports that are sort of managed through essentially what we call O&M contracts, but they're really sort of labor contracts. So essentially, it's outsourcing labor in the private sector. It's like outsourcing your janitorial or food and beverage. It really doesn't result in significant benefit. There have been some terminal leases that have been done by airlines. JFK Terminal 4 was one of the first, where a group of 4 airlines, decided to develop their own facility, their own terminal at JFK. It's been quite successful, and the Port Authority was a key partner in getting that done. A small airport outside of Orlando, Sanford Airport, has a pretty unique structure where there is a lease, a long-term lease for the terminal that is operated by a private operator, and the rest of the airfield is operated by the Orlando Sanford Airport Authority. So it's a pretty interesting structure, and it's worked quite well. It's been quite successful. Orlando Sanford is now the largest base for Allegiant Airlines, and it also has been a key airport for charter airlines to come in from Europe and from South America. LaGuardia, with the central terminal building, it's currently where Port Authority did another P3 for a redevelopment of the central terminal building, a significant project, about $4 billion. And that project, if you guys have been to LaGuardia recently, you've seen the construction underway, and it's a bit of a mess right now, but with the hope of it becoming a world-class terminal. And similarly, Delta Airlines is embarking on the redevelopment of their terminal at LaGuardia under a similar sort of P3 structure. But that's airline led by Delta Airlines. And then there have been sort of whole airport leases. Some early on small airport lease in Stewart Airport in New York. That airport has now reverted back to the Port Authority, so the Port Authority runs that. We've heard the example of Puerto Rico, which went through the airport privatization pilot program. Again, a very successful story where there have been significant improvements. That airport was transitioned in 2013. 4 years later, we've seen some significant improvements in the facilities and the passenger experience at San Juan. So all in all, success. Chicago Midway tried to go through it, was not completed. Tried twice. The first time, financial crisis impacted that privatization effort, and the second time, there just was lack of political will to move that forward. And currently, Westchester Airport is in the market with an RFP, again, a small airport outside of New York, going through the pilot program. And then St. Louis Airport has just filed its application to go through the pilot program as well. So how do we get there? U.S. authorities really need to unlock trapped value, in our infrastructure. But we need to do that without creating adverse impacts. We can't create an adverse impact to budgets, to the public budgets. We can't create adverse impacts for taxpayers, and we have to, and without creating adverse impact to the traveling public and other users of the facility. So how do we do that? We do that through education. We do that through establishing clear requirements and ground rules from the start. And those ground rules need to provide clear, measurable, long-term benefits for the community. They need to encourage and even incentivize investment. They also need to provide for clear operating standards that improve operations, again, measurably improve operations, improve customer experience, and improve the physical plant. I'll leave you with this chart. So there is a lot of activity in the market. A lot of airports around the country are now looking at a P3 solution for either the entire airport, but primarily for terminal privatizations. San Diego has been exploring a P3 solution for it's new for a replacement terminal for Terminal 1. LAX has embarked on a P3 for its people mover and its consolidated car rental facilities, but also is looking at a potential P3 for a new terminal, Terminal 9 at LAX. Similarly, Burbank is looking at a replacement terminal for its 1929 era terminal building. And Oakland is also considering some sort of P3 for expanding its terminal facilities. I talked about St. Louis. Des Moines has also been exploring some sort of a P3 process. Milwaukee has just launched, essentially they're not calling it a P3, but it is a P3 light for its concessions redevelopment, similar to the Great Hall project in Denver. San Antonio is studying sort of P3 alternative as well. Newark is looking at P3 for redevelopment of its Terminal A. It's probably going to be a P3 light solution with some sort of O&M contract with a traditional delivery of the new terminal building. JFK, there's been a lot of activity with Governor Cuomo's vision plan coming out earlier this month about sort of transforming JFK so that JFK can accommodate 100 million passengers. So JFK is an airport that has a number of unit terminals that are controlled by airlines, and all those airlines are looking at now sort of how do they conform with the governor's vision plan. The Port Authority is putting together a master plan that coincides with a vision plan, and so likely to be some sort of B3 act up at JFK. And certainly the Port Authority has historical precedents in doing that, and I mentioned Westchester already. So these are projects that are likely to happen sort of within the next 12 to 18 months or so. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Happy to take questions later. I think so. Okay. I think.
Are you taking questions?
Sure. Happy to.
In the earlier presentation, in the main conference room or the auditorium, someone said that triple Ps for hub airports wouldn't work. What's your view on that? Is it right? Why?
Well, again, it depends on the circumstances. I think it'd be a general statement that P3s for hub airports would not work. I would disagree with that. And it really depends on the circumstances. So, for example, we're seeing, we're seeing, we're seeing P3s at some of the large hub airports now. I mentioned JFK, which has had, several terminals, or two terminals now that have been developed through a P3 concept. The International Terminal 4, which is the International Arrivals Terminal, and then Terminal 1. So those were both done on a P3 basis. We are, LAX is considering a P3 for one of the terminal buildings there as well. So some of the larger hub airports could potentially see P3s for terminal development, that they're developing sort of discrete pieces. Now, whether those airports potentially could be candidates to go through a pilot program for a full airport privatization, I think it's on a case-by-case basis, because it really depends on what the drivers of that, what the municipality is trying to achieve through that privatization. Is there sort of an astute need to fund, other public pension funds, to fund other infrastructure in the city, to have monies for other sort of public necessities like police and fire. So it really depends on sort of what the objective is. But I think given the right circumstances, there's no reason why a large hub airport could not go through the privatization process, the FAA process.
So the way you said it was almost definitive, so there's no law or...
Without going through the FAA's privatization program, any kind of revenue that's generated as a result of that P3 for the authority has to stay on airport and to be used for airport purposes. It cannot be diverted off airport and be used for other municipal purposes. The FAA pilot program provides an exemption, subject to that exemption being granted, provides an exemption for those funds to be deployed elsewhere in the city. So the city can use that for other budgetary needs, pension fund needs, other infrastructure that is not airport related specifically. And that program currently is limited. It's got 10 slots, and only one slot is for a large hub airport.